My daughter's father wants to use her as therapy for his new wife. When I became pregnant, even though I wasn't married or in a serious relationship, I had to face humiliation, especially from my family. My father almost disowned me, but my mom and grandparents were able to calm him and change his mind. However, he didn't forgive me. He never did. The worst part of the whole pregnancy issue was that it was a result of a one-time fling, a one-night stand with a total stranger. I met the stranger, let's call him Fred, at a friend's house party. It was my last year in college, and even though I had been a serious student all 4 years, I decided to let loose that night. It was the first time since high school that I decided to do something fun. In fact, it was my first party since prom. I guess I overdid it that night and got a little bit drunk. I hooked up with Fred and it took just 5 minutes to commit the sin that almost ruined my life. I didn't even have a boyfriend in college. But who would believe when I say that? When everyone found out I was pregnant, they automatically assumed that I was a hypocrite. Even people who used to be my friends didn't believe when I told them that doing it with Fred was my first time ever. They should have understood that if I was a pro at stuff like this, I would have known how to take measures against pregnancy. But nobody considered my logic. The most painful part was when I overheard my so-called best friend, who had invited me to the party, calling me all sorts of shameful names behind my back. The shame became worse when I told Fred that I was pregnant and he was responsible. He turned me down, saying he would never accept a baby from a one-night stand. He made matters worse by telling every one of his friends that I belonged to the streets, and he was too smart to take responsibility for someone like me. This was why my dad almost made the decision to disown me. The rumors spreading about me had gotten to him that I was a promiscuous girl on campus. Everything Fred said and accused me of seemed to confirm that to him. So I can understand why my dad was so mad at him. In fact, he has never looked at my face since that time. I was alone during this period. During my final exams, my stomach had already swollen and it was super stressful for me. While all my mates were in several study groups, I had to study on my own while dealing with pregnancy issues. I couldn't attend my graduation ceremony because that was the day I had my beautiful daughter. I named her Daisy, and for the first time in about 9 months, she was my source of joy. Having Daisy changed everything for me. I no longer felt depressed and alone. My family, including my father, began to support me in raising little Daisy. How could they not? She was so adorable. While Daisy had many of my features, she had her father's blue eyes. Her eyes looked very beautiful and thinking about her made me want to try harder in everything I did, just for her sake. Birthing Daisy helped me realize what true love really meant. I understood what it meant to be a mother, and I promised myself that I would do all in my power for her. I didn't want to tell Fred anything about Daisy. After all, he caused me the biggest humiliation of my life. But my mom, in her motherly wisdom, advised me against it. She told me that Daisy would one day ask for her father, and I would be at fault if my daughter discovered that I intentionally hid her from her father. My mother said my daughter could even resent me and choose to live with her absent father over me. I took her advice on what to do instead. My mom's advice was for me to inform Fred and store his response as receipts I can show off sometime later in the future. So, I called Fred and informed him that I already had his baby and that he was free to visit if he wanted to see her. Fred responded that my baby was a bastard and he wanted nothing to do with neither I nor the baby. Unknown to Fred, I recorded the conversation and saved it in my Google Drive. I wasn't surprised by his response. After those hurtful words he spewed at me and the rumors he started about me, I would be foolish to expect him to be decent. Ignoring Fred, I focused on raising Daisy, while searching for ways to become a better person and a better parent. My first job didn't pay so well. Yet I put in the hours because I didn't want to be overly reliant on my parents. My mother helped me take care of Daisy while I was at work because I couldn't afford the daycare center from my meager salary. My cousin, who was way older than me, Kate, and her husband, were my daughter's godparents, and they supported me a lot during Daisy's first years. One time Kate advised me to call Fred again to inform him about his daughter. It was the day before Daisy's second-year birthday. Kate said that Fred might have become more mature within the past 2 years and might be more open to reason than he was before. Was that the case when I called him? No, of course not. Instead of being open to reason, Fred only proved to me that he was open to insulting me. I guess he must have thought that I was trying to beg him for some money to raise the child or something. Or maybe he just wasn't interested in taking responsibility. Well, of course, I recorded the conversation too. The same thing happened when Daisy was 4 years old. She started asking after her father. So, I called Fred to inform him of Daisy's growth. I sent him pictures and invited him to some function she had in school. Fred would often blow us off every time. Even when I invited him to Daisy's school, he simply told me that he wasn't interested. When Daisy started asking to speak with him, he stopped answering my calls. All this time, I've been working my hardest at my job. I had gotten a better job with a meager pay and I was learning some tech skills because I had a mentor who told me that tech was the job of the future. I had to juggle my roles as a staff at the company where I work, my roles as a mother to my lovely daughter, and my roles as a student trying to seek better knowledge for career advancement. It wasn't easy, but I pulled through. I went to work by day and spent time with my daughter when I got back in the evening. Then on weekends, I spent most of the day studying, while enjoying the rest of the evenings with Daisy. My biggest motivation was my daughter. Like I said, all I ever wanted was the best for her. I wanted to ensure that I gave her everything she wanted and raise her right, like I was raised. I also decided that when the time was right, I would tell her my entire story, so she could learn from it and from how a simple mistake is enough to change the trajectory of someone's life forever. Every morning, I kiss my daughter on her cheeks before I leave the house, and the smile she gives me provides the strength I need to make it through the day. When she runs to hug me in the evenings at my return, that eliminates all my stress and I feel revitalized. It makes me feel like I had done something worthwhile that day. You can understand from all of this that I basically live for my daughter. She's my reason for overcoming every challenge and seeing every new morning. Yet, Fred continued to ignore us as he used to. I made sure I continued calling him, just so I could record the number of times I called while he chose not to answer. Someday, when Daisy asks after her father, I will pull out my record and show her all these receipts. I don't mean for her to resent him, but for her to understand that her father is essentially useless. One night, after Daisy had turned 6, I called Fred again like I used to, but he didn't ignore my call that night. Instead, he answered the call and began to ask questions about Daisy. Questions like how she was doing, how old she was, what her favorite food, color, hobbies, and so on. I was shocked at first because I thought he had repented. I thought he suddenly had a change of heart and had become mature as Kate and I once expected him to. That was why I agreed when he asked to speak with Daisy. I didn't want to deprive her of talking to her dad, especially since I didn't know how long the new Fred would last. The conversation between Daisy and Fred carried on for a while. Daisy had so many questions, but Fred couldn't answer them all. Eventually, he asked if Daisy would like to come over during the next holiday. The holiday was in 3 weeks, so when Daisy turned her cute little face to me to ask for permission, I gave her the go-ahead. When I got the phone back and discussed it with Fred, I gave him a condition if he wanted Daisy to visit his house. My condition was simple: Daisy's godparents would visit too. Fred grumbled at first, but he eventually agreed. After the call with Fred, Daisy was so happy, I was almost jealous. But I understood her joy. Her father, who we had been calling almost every weekend since the past 2 or 3 years, had finally answered. In fact, she was going to see her father for the very first time in her life. I totally understand why she was so happy. I informed Kate of everything we discussed, and she and her husband praised me for giving Fred that condition. They said they wouldn't have felt comfortable letting just me and Daisy visit Fred after over 6 years of him consistently denying that Daisy was his daughter. In preparation for the visit, I took Daisy shopping for clothes, shoes, and even bags. I usually buy these things for my daughter, but this time, I decided we need special shopping since she was visiting her dad for the first time in her life. When the day finally came, we drove to Fred's house in Kate's husband's car. I didn't have a car because I used the money that would have bought a car and paid insurance to open a trust fund for my daughter. I wanted to make sure she was set up for life financially by the time she was ready for college. In fact, I intend to start teaching her the basics of business and instill her with the entrepreneurial mindset. When we got to Fred's house, he wasn't alone. His family was there. And I'm not just referring to his father, mother, sisters, and cousins. I mean that his wife was also there. I had absolutely no idea he was married. It made me wonder why he left that important detail out during our discussion. Worst case is that wasn't the only important detail Fred left out. We realized when we arrived there that he hadn't told his family that he had a child out of wedlock. As if we didn't feel uncomfortable enough, being outsiders, he just had to make us feel like we had committed a great sin in the midst of his folks. As the day progressed, I began to notice some abnormalities with Fred's wife, even with Fred himself. At first, I noticed that he didn't act like he wanted to spend time with Daisy. The little girl came visiting with a list of questions and a bucket list of activities she wanted to do with her father, so it was disappointing that he didn't have the time for her. The person who tried to spend time with Daisy in his place was his wife. I didn't feel comfortable with this at first, but then I calmed my nerves saying there was nothing to be worried about. When she started trying to get all physical with Daisy, I understood that something was wrong. Fred's wife wanted to carry my daughter around as if Daisy was still a kid. It began to make even Daisy uncomfortable. I told her not to carry my daughter because she would be more comfortable when given freedom to express herself like she wanted. To my utter shock, Fred's wife said, "Don't tell me how to raise my baby." I became speechless and thought that I might have misheard her. But when she continued to act as if she was Daisy's mother, I realized that she really said what I thought she did. I immediately reported this to Kate, who agreed that something was wrong with Fred's wife indeed. She advised me to be on guard and be ready to leave with my daughter if things got out of hand. The straw that broke the camel's back for me was when Daisy told me she wanted to use the toilet. Fred's wife came out of nowhere and said she'd take care of my daughter and clean her up. I got up in anger and informed her that Daisy was no longer a kid who wore diapers anymore. Besides, she could clean herself up. Fred's wife became dismissive towards me. She told me again not to tell her how to raise her baby. At this point, I had to pull her down to reality. I told her my daughter is not her baby. Then I told Daisy we were leaving. Even though she had just mentioned her intention to use the toilet, Daisy was very happy to hear that we were leaving. Fred's wife, on the other hand, went berserk on us. She said she wouldn't let me take my daughter out of the house and began to accuse me of kidnapping. Fred's family began to calm her down and console her from crying as if she was the victim in the situation. I became pissed and demanded an explanation from Fred when he showed up to the scene of the commotion. Fred took me to another room for a private chat, and what he explained to me then was beyond reasonable. He explained that his wife had recently lost her daughter and was very hurt emotionally, but that the presence of Daisy might help her to become whole again. Then he'd begged me to let Daisy stay with him and his wife for a few more days. He promised that after his wife was alright once again, Daisy could return to me and our relationship would return to how it was before. I told him he was crazy. I couldn't help but get mad at him for everything he said. His audacity was really annoying. He thought he could ignore my daughter all her life, then only call to see her when he wanted to use her to cure his insane wife, and then he'll dispose of my daughter when he's done. I walked out of the room and told Kate and her husband that we were leaving. Of course, Fred's wife tried to put up a resistance again, and this time, even Fred's family joined her. But Kate's husband is a bodybuilder and quite strong. He easily overpowered all of them. As we went straight to the car, Daisy told me that she never wanted to visit the place ever again. In fact, she refused to speak to Fred ever since that incident anytime he called. Fred began to call us every day. I would answer his calls unlike how he ignored mine for years. But Daisy would refuse to talk to him. At some point, Fred started demanding parental rights over Daisy and even had the guts to demand shared custody. He got me super pissed off with that. I made a huge withdrawal from my savings to hire the best lawyer I could find. After telling my lawyer everything concerning Fred, I and Daisy, and showing him all the receipts I had from how he had been ignoring his daughter for months, my lawyer assured me that it was a super easy case. That lawyer is one of the best investments I ever made in my life because what she did was beyond my expectations. Not only did she get the judge to dismiss Fred's case and cancel his shared custody request, but she countersued Fred and his wife. By the end of the case, Fred was mandated to pay about $15,000 for the first 6 years of Daisy's life that he hadn't been paying child support. Next, I got a restraining order against him and wife. They were not allowed to visit or be anywhere around Daisy and I. I was shocked by the end because I didn't expect such good results from the case, but I was really glad. Fred was advised to get his wife therapy, but she didn't. Kate told me some news about Fred's wife later that I found very hard to believe. Kate said that Fred's wife tried to kidnap their neighbor's daughter, so the neighbor got her arrested and pressed charges. Eventually, the court sent her to an asylum. Well, I could only feel sorry for her and her husband, but I could never let them have my daughter. And I'm glad I put up that fight against them.